Philippians chapter 1, 27 through 30. That's where we're going to be. I don't have copies of our lesson today. I'll try to bring extras next week of this week and everything else. We got a new internet thing going on, which it's behind that screen and there, and you can look up and down the hallways. They're blue and they glow, which is just scary, isn't it? But anyway, that's how in the office you connect to the copy machine. And so I haven't gotten a password yet. So one of these days I'll get a password and I can copy stuff out. So anytime you feel important, just be a preacher. And it's all different. All right. As far as people we need to remember, Dee Dee's here. Didn't have so much of her surgery. I think she went to get a kidney stone worked on Friday. And how far away was it? The machine was 9 hours away. It wasn't quite that long range. So she had to wait, and that'll be a little bit later. I haven't heard yet from the Glass family about how their thing went Friday, but I know they're back home. Who else do we need? Yes, sir, Kelvin. I feel turned on. Let's see. I'm green. Does that work better? Okay. And so we got that going on. Who else? When do you go see your orthopedic? Do you go see your orthopedic doctor soon? Your orthopedic doctor.
I'm going to orthopedics 1st of July.
1st of July. All right. Okay. I think we got everybody. All right. Now, in Philippians 1, what we're talking about is Paul's plea. Yes, sir. Questionnaires are due tonight. I got to fill one out. Questionnaires are due tonight. And so, did everybody get one? If you did not, are they on the table out back? Okay. All right. Jennifer will go get it. Does anybody need a questionnaire if you didn't get a chance to fill one out? All right. We've got a few. All right. So we'll work on getting that here in just a little bit. All right. Philippians chapter 1, beginning of verse 27. And we're going to look at this from the aspect of the Roman army. And I'll explain to you why here in just a second. Let's go ahead and read it. Here in verse 27, only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so whether I come to see you or I'm absent, I may hear of your affairs, that you stand fast in one spirit with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel, not in any way terrified by your adversaries, which to them is proof of perdition, but to you of salvation, and that from God. For to you has been granted on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake, having the same conflict which you saw in me, and that you now hear is also in me. Okay. What you see there's a lot of things flowing through here. One thing I want us to see is what we're looking at here in verse 27. Let your conduct be worthy of the gospel. Now, what you'll compare that to is, let me make sure it's where it's supposed to be. Look in chapter 3 in verse 20. Okay? That letting your conduct, thanks, Lonnie. That idea of let your conduct be worthy of the gospel, that it's mesithuho, looking into Greek, which I can't say Greek very well because those words just don't come out of my lips very well. But that word there is citizenship. He's saying you need to act like a citizen of your country. And that will come back through in chapter 3 and verse 20. All right. As you think about what it means to act as a citizen of your country, let's think, and I don't think we're getting into too deep of stereotypes, what people of different places act like. Does anybody else need a sheet? Did everybody fill theirs out last week? Okay. You think, okay, people act a certain way who live in certain places. We live in the quasi-south. You go further south, how do people in Louisiana act? Crazy, all right? They eat things which are just nuts, right? It's awfully good, they say. I remember working at a camp called Smiling Acres right outside of Baton Rouge. Their kids had come to our camp, and so some of the kids at our church wanted to go over there, so I drove the bus over. 98 degrees, the humidity was about 3,000%, right? Okay, usually you're at camp, you want to eat light. First day was chili. This is lunch. The next day was gumbo. Next day was jambalaya. Next day was etouffee. And I was just thinking, what is wrong with these people, right? But, you eat those things, and they did not have salt and pepper on the table. They had Tabasco sauce. And, very different. Very, very different people. All right. People up north, how are they different? Talk a lot faster, right? The social graces are a little bit different. There's not as much small talk a lot of times. Things such as that. It's cold up there. Huh? Okay. They're a touch on the more industrious in the deep south. They don't relax as much. Okay. All right. You see how we act certain ways according to where we're at. What Paul is saying is he's saying, I want you to recognize what it means to be a Christian, and I want you to act like it. You need to recognize first and foremost that you're a Christian and you belong to this nation. You belong to this kingdom. Now, if you remember all the way back to our introduction, this is really speaking to these people because Philippi was a colony of whom? It is a Roman colony. What happened is Philippi had been built, centuries earlier. When the Romans came, they conquered it. The people rebelled. The Romans came back and they leveled the place. Sent everybody else, they either killed them, sold them into slavery, or sent them to live somewhere else. So they had vacant land. And so they built their own little city. And if you're a Roman in the Roman legions, after a couple of years, certain years, 20 to 30 years, depending on the era of time, when you retired, they gave you property. And so the people who lived in Philippi were all veterans. It was a Roman colony, so everybody who lived there was connected to the Roman army and things such as that. That's why when Paul came into Philippi, he didn't have a synagogue to go to. Jews weren't there because this is a Roman colony. If you're a member of the city of Philippi, you had Roman citizenship. And so these people would look out to other people throughout Greece and Macedonia, and they had a different view of everybody because they said, we're Romans, we're the ones in charge, we're the ones who conquered. And so they knew that they acted a little bit different. And so Paul is using that aspect of that city when he cranks up here in 27, chapter 1 and verse 27, and chapter 3 and verse 20. And he says, you act a certain way. Your mama raised you up because you ever have your mama say, listen, you reflect on me, so you better behave. Remember for me it was a Ray, whatever it was for you. Remember your family name and how you treat other people and what you do. Paul's saying that to these folks. He's saying you need to behave as a citizen, not of Rome. You need to behave as a citizen of the kingdom. That's what's coming through here. Now, sometimes we look at this and we think, I don't know what this means, because are any of us worthy? Have any of us earned our salvation? No. No matter how good you may be, no matter how many righteous acts you may do, Isaiah 64:6, you cannot earn your salvation. Our righteous acts are nothing more than filthy rags. We cannot measure up to God. So when he says act worthy of your calling, what he's saying is don't deserve your Christianity, don't earn your Christianity. He says you act like you're part of the family of God, and you treat yourself in that way. And so you see it at the beginning and you see it at the end of this book as it comes across. Now, he speaks in Roman army terms here, and I want us to see that. There's three aspects of the Roman army. And if you study Roman army very much, you understand the different things. Back in ancient times, used to, like in the days of David and Goliath, both sides would sit on top of a mountaintop and look at each other, decide that they're going to fight, and these dudes would raise their swords and shields, and they would just run at each other, and there you had your fight. That was the ancient way of fighting, okay? That worked pretty well. That's what everybody liked to do. Sometimes in Israel, we see that one champion or another champion would face, and that way you could win a battle or win a war and not have a lot of people die, things such as that. The Greeks came through, and the Greeks had what was called the phalanx, or or you call it different things. But it's this idea of where people would work together in harmony. They would work together in formation, where the shields would protect each other, and you would have your sword that would go here, and the people behind you would hold up their shield. And you'd look like a turtle as you went across. It's called the phalanx. And the Greeks were really good, Alexander the Great and others, because of this formation. As long as you were disciplined enough to hold ranks, you would win the battle. And so the battles turned into an idea of not who is strongest, not who is better, but who is bravest and willing to hold their ranks in the right way. Now, the Romans came along, and through their legion work, and through their formations, they were able to outclass what the Greeks were able to do. And so the Romans oftentimes would win. Why were Romans always winning their battles? It wasn't because they were better soldiers necessarily or better fighters. It's because they always had logistics. It's because they were always fighting. They always never gave up. And it's because they were always willing to obey orders. And as you go through 27 through 30, you see Paul use those exact same things, talking about why Christians always win their battles. Why do you always win? Because you remember who you are. You are saying that you're better than everybody else doesn't sound Christian. It's not that Christian idea of pride of I'm better than you, but it's realizing you belong to Jesus. And so what you're doing is better than what everybody else does. Does that make sense? Do you get what I'm trying to say? I don't know. I don't even know if I get what I'm trying to say sometimes. Oh, well. All right. So that's what you see here. Recognize that you are that one spirit striving together that are going through. Now look in verse 28. Do not be terrified of your adversaries, which to them is proof of perdition, but to you of salvation, and that from God. The way you lost a battle from the Roman days all the way up until, I guess, around Civil War days, was both sides would line up and they would shoot at each other, right? You remember how the British would do, and they would do all the way to World War I? You'd shoot at one another, and generally whoever broke ranks first, got scared and ran away, they would lose. And the other side would chase them with the bayonets and everything else like that. So it was important for the Roman soldier, as he was in battle, never to become fearful and run away. That's the reason Hannibal was such a big deal with his elephants. And that's the reason a lot of the Persian things that Roman soldiers would have trouble going against them. They always had to be brave, always had to hold formation, always had to work together. Well, bringing it to Christianity, we'd run into trouble because sometimes we're filled with fear. We are filled with dread because of things that we're facing. And as we go through these issues of life, we feel like, man, it's not worth it. I'm just going to give up. You ever feel like that? Sometimes that happens to Christians. You know, if God really loved me, he wouldn't be doing all these things to me. Or, man, you know, my life is so hard, I feel depressed. I feel like I'm just not going to be able to go on anymore. A lot of times people will have that kind of idea. Paul here is saying, listen, as a Christian, you need to stand for your faith. And you need to not be fearful even when times are tough. Acts chapter 5 and verse 41. The apostles began to suffer, and as they began to suffer, they rejoiced. Why did they rejoice? Did they like getting beat? Yeah, it's 4:41, I think. Yeah, it showed that they were different. They rejoiced that they had been worthy to suffer for the name, right? It's important for us to recognize when things don't go right. It's not because God doesn't love us, right? God allows things to happen in our life. It's a fallen world. There's a lot of issues, and when we face those issues, it helps us to grow. Sometimes it's just because God can be glorified through what we go through. But whatever it is that you face, heaven will be worth it. Whatever it is that you go through or that you are going through, heaven is absolutely worth it. And you can stay fast until the end. You can stay faithful to the end, and he will see you through whatever it is that you're going through. Now, the third point that we see here as we look here. Notice here, it's been granted on behalf to you, the Christ, not only to believe, but also to be suffer, in that same conflict which you saw in me and now hear in me. Look at that last verse. What is Paul saying about this? Paul is saying, you are not alone. Stephen Ambrose was, I think, one of the greatest historians as far as war things, who is in modern history. He passed away, I guess it's been about 10 years ago, but he lived down in New Orleans. But he wrote, a band of brothers, wrote a lot of different books, really good books about, the Lewis and Clark expedition and the Transcontinental Railroad, and a lot of these, really good author. But one of the things that he emphasizes quite a bit, especially in his World War II books, is that one of the reasons why the soldiers in the U.S. Army were successful many times, yes, they were very patriotic, yes, they had a lot of good training, but a lot of times these guys who were fighting for the guys that were on either side of them. They created very close relationships in combat, and they were not going to fail in their job because they loved their brothers so much. And the cohesiveness of the unit oftentimes is what held them through a lot of things that they faced. Stephen Ambrose brings that up in quite a few of his books. Stephen Ambrose, Ambrose. He's the one who has that World War II museum down in New Orleans. Well, he had it, I guess, since he's passed on. The thing about that is that applies to the church, doesn't it? When I face my problems alone, I can stand up to Satan, I can stand up to the world, and sometimes I'll be successful. But one of the reasons why church is so super important is because when I can share with other people, when I can be encouraged by other people, when I'm in fellowship with other people, that makes me a lot stronger. I can talk to people who have been through these things before, who have faced these issues earlier in life, and they can guide me, they can help me. I can see myself as an example to those who are younger, who are following along afterwards. Just this fellowship and the importance of church makes it where it works so much better. And that's something which we need to always encourage and make flourish in the church. You don't come to church just because you have to. You come to church because this is your family. These are people who love you. These are people who help you. These are people who will be there for you when everything else seems to fall apart. Okay? What can we do in the Lord's church to encourage that mindset, you think? We seem a little quieter today, so we're going to see if we can talk a little bit. What can we do to encourage a family mindset in the Lord's church? Be friendly. All right. Actually know people. Okay? It's hard sometimes to get to church on time. Sometimes we leave really quick right afterwards. And then we say, man, I don't know a lot of people at church. Okay? Take an opportunity to be friendly to folks. Get to know people's names, their background, a little bit of things that's going on in their life. Okay? That friendliness which is there. All right, what's something else you can do? Yeah? Everybody gets the bread from Maryland. Yeah, yep. We've been praying for the return of the cinnamon rolls, but we haven't got that far yet. But the bread ministry, okay, excellent. Okay, and that's one way a lot of people can, one person can help a lot of people, and you get to meet a lot of people through your bread, don't you? Yes, you don't make many enemies when you have bread for everybody, right? Okay, Bill is a big card writer. Yeah. You get a card from Bill. Bill loves writing cards, and that's something that each one of us can do, and is a great ministry and a great way to reach out to folks. All right, what else can we do to try to help the church be a family attitude? Besides speak up in class. All right. People like to hear their names. Okay. And so especially if they don't get much attention and I go by them, I say their name and I say it loud. Okay. Dale Carnegie, influencing people, and what was it? Winning relationships, influencing people. What was his? Huh? Yes, that's right. The most important sound that anyone will ever hear is their own name. As Dale Carnegie was very famous for saying that. People love to hear their name. And so that's an important thing to make people feel loved and accepted. That's right. Okay, what else can we do? Speak to people by name, get to know them. The service ideas, the bread and the cards. Okay. Yeah, the touchy-feely stuff. Share your okra. That runs folks off. Yeah, it runs people off. Do you love okra? All these people love okra. That, when it's boiled and it goes down your throat and you don't have to do anything, nah. Yeah. Fried is about the only way that works. You like stewed okra with the tomatoes and everything? No, it's just the okra. Man, I want something that I have to swallow, that doesn't just like do the water slide down, Many years ago, I lived in a church house. I think I was in college, and I started a little garden. And of course, okra, you don't have to work. Okra comes up automatically. It's a devil's plant. It just pops right up. And I remember I picked some of it, and I ate it, and then I was done with it, and then I passed it around to other people, and they were done with it really quick. And of course, I was there at the church house, and I thought, I'll just ignore it. I won't pick it anymore. Well, these church ladies started coming to church early and picking it and putting it at my doorstep. And I finally had to go out there and just weed eat the okra to finally where nobody would bring it to me anymore. But
how do you pick okra?
wear long sleeves. Well, yeah. Well, if you pull it hard enough, the whole thing comes up. Yeah, gloves and long sleeves because it makes you. Yes, yeah, fix it with your bush hog. That's the best way to work on okra. That's for sure. You preach for 30 minutes, and what do people hear?
Huh? There's the church up here on the corner that does have the garden.
Oh, the Methodist church up here that has that community garden. The funniest thing about the community garden, and bless whoever wants to do it, when people come into a food pantry, the last thing they want is fresh vegetables. Because a lot of times they don't have the wherewithal to make it, to produce it into a casserole or whatever else. And a lot of times that's a lot of work, and a lot of times you don't have everything that goes with it. And so the idea of a community garden doesn't work in today's society very well. A lot of people don't like vegetables, and so it's kind of hard. You hand somebody 10 things of squash, and they're like, well, okay, Here I am with squash, what do you do with it? And so I remember the first year they did that, they got to the point where they couldn't give it away to anybody. And so they started bringing some over here, and I don't think we were able to give it away very well. And then the whole church got together and used their squash and stuff, and they made casseroles. Well, you eat a squash casserole for a week. You don't want a squash casserole next week. So the community garden sometimes is hard to do. Corn works really well in the community garden, and tomatoes work really well. But other vegetables are a little bit tougher. And so that's one of those science of benevolence that you learn pretty quick, is it's hard to give people vegetables. Yeah. But when you see older ladies, they like vegetables. A lot of times they'll work on those quite a bit. Is our pantry still very active? Yeah. Gwen and Monty. Marilyn, how many people we have come? It's about 16 to 20 a time. Sometimes more, isn't it? Our food pantry. Sometimes it'll be a ton of folks, and sometimes not as much. It depends on what part of the month you're in, too. But we have 12 who work with that quite a bit of our members. And so it does really well. It does really well. That's one of the things we do really well as a congregation that we don't talk about doing very much. All right, back to our Bible class. I'm sorry, I get sidetracked sometimes. All right, so he's talking about the fellowship which is here. You see this in me, I want you to see it in other people as well. And that's something we always have to remember. So let's go through and cover those 3 points and cover them pretty well. Why do we fight the fight that we do? Because of who we are. I am a Christian and I am a member of God's kingdom. I am, as Paul would say in 1 Corinthians 6, my body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. And so there are things I'm going to stay away from. There's things that I'm going to avoid because my body is precious and my body is holy. Okay? That's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 is the idea of not having fear. Yes, you're going through these things to these people that are going against you. Jesus himself said some people will harm you and they'll think they're serving God by harming you. He says right through here, these people are going against you, but I want you to recognize that this is for the glory of God. Now, notice, let me find my phrase right here. Okay? Let's see where I'm at. Look at verse 29. For you has been granted on behalf of Christ not only to believe on him, but also to what? Suffer for his sake. Notice how he puts that. Your suffering for the sake of Christ is an opportunity which is here. It's an opportunity. And that's a strange idea right there, isn't it? To think of that being an opportunity. There's a lot of funny stories. There was, I think his name was Epicletus. He was an Egyptian monk, all right, going back in church history. We're talking about 365, somewhere in that area, late 4th century. At this point, the way you became famous in the church was you figured out a way to die. If you died and became a martyr, people would really honor your name. People would give a lot of money to your family. And so these guys who were coming up in the church at that time, the quasi-church, although they had begun believing a lot of different things other than New Testament Christianity, their goal was to die. You wanted to become a martyr. Well, wouldn't you know it, the entire Roman Empire switched over to Christianity, and they weren't making martyrs anymore. And so Epicletus and these other guys were really upset because there was no way now to suffer for the sake of Christ, and became famous. And so what Epicletus was known for was he was just south of, he was in Egypt. He created a platform that was almost 100 feet in the air. And on that platform, it was only about 4 feet by 4 feet. And he stood on top of that platform for his entire life. And people would come and look at him and say, wow, what a Christian. Look at how he's suffering for the cause of Christ. He's up there in prayer. He's up there just suffering in the sun and the elements and everything else. And so people would make a pilgrimage to where he was, and they would bring him food and bring him water and bring him gifts and bring him clothes. And it was one of those things where everybody was saying, look at Epicletus and the way in which he suffers. And actually, he's considered by a saint in the Coptic church and some other churches even today. He was looking for a way to suffer in order to please Christ. Now, was God super impressed that guy had put himself on a platform 100 feet in the air? It's one of those things where, he got to heaven and God probably was like, what in the world are you doing? Okay? How does that apply to today? There's sometimes we suffer and there's really no reason to suffer. And there's sometimes we suffer, and as we're going through these issues and problems in life, and we make ourselves to be martyrs, God hasn't planned for us to be a martyr. Now, I say that because there are times in my life where I've done that very same thing. I went through a few times in the beginning of my career where I would put together an entire VBS, and we'd have 6 learning centers. I decorated every single room. I wrote all the lesson plans. I did everything, and I was worn out, and my life was miserable for that week. But I did it because I was serving God, and I looked at myself and thought, man, what a great Christian I am. You know what? That church was 400 people, and I denied a lot of people in that church an opportunity to serve. I was going against what God would want me to do. When you're suffering, yes, it's blessed to suffer. But when you make yourself a martyr, make sure you're dying on the right hill. All right? Make sure that what you're doing is not to bring glory to yourself, but it's to bring glory to God. Does that make sense? All right. Thank you for being here. Next week we cover chapter 2, which is one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. See you tonight.